Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Bo Burlingham is the former executive editor of Inc. magazine, a contributor at Forbes magazine, and the author of 5 books. His first book, The Great Game of Business, was written with Jack Stack from Springfield Remanufacturing Corp., which introduced the concept of open book management, has sold more than 500,000 copies, and was named one of the 100 best business books of all time, followed up with A Stake in the Outcome, recounting how SRC built its culture of ownership while developing the business model that's allowed it to grow from 16 million to over 600 million in revenue at the time of writing. He's the co-author with Norm Brodsky of The Knack, How Entrepreneurs Learn to Handle Whatever Comes Up. He's also the author of Small Giants and Finish Big. The popularity of Small Giants led to the creation of the Small Giants community, where business leaders learn and share practices and systems they can use to make their companies great, whether or not the businesses are big. You can find Bo at boburlingham.com and more at greatgame.com and Small Giants. Bo, what I see in you is someone who believes there's a better way to do business. Perhaps someone who is disappointed or frustrated by the mediocrity and misery that's found in way too many workplaces, but can see there's a better way and is passionate about telling that story. If that resonates with you, tell us, how did you come to be in this place?
Well, Brad, that's an accurate description of where I am now. I haven't always been there. In fact, when I was younger, I was a wild-eyed radical who was very anti-business and who thought most of the world's problems came from business. And that really stayed with me until I got to a point where I was married, I had 2 children, and I needed a job, a real job. Not, writing is not really a real job. A real job is I had to go and work for somebody and get paid a regular salary. And the company I wound up working for was a company called Fidelity Investments, which is a very successful financial services company based in Boston, Massachusetts, and it mainly has mutual funds, although it has expanded a great deal. It has a very successful stock exchange, and it really didn't know what to expect when I went there. In some ways, I thought I was the last. I thought they'd made a big mistake in hiring me. Because they probably didn't want somebody who thought the way that I did. But I made a point of going in with as open a mind as I could muster. And in fact, I was there for 1 year, and it was a very eye-opening experience for me, because I realized that most of the terrible things I thought about business and the people who were in business were just not true. That I was working with people who I liked and respected very much, and who were trying to serve other people, who were trying to help other people with their financial issues. And since I was at an age where I was beginning to have financial issues myself, I thought that Fidelity was doing an excellent job of helping people that way. And I thought the people who were doing it were really wonderful people. And this challenged practically everything that I had believed up to that point. And it forced me to really go back and sort of reevaluate a lot of things that I had believed up until then.
Yeah.
And it was at first sort of disorienting because what I believed and what all of my friends believed and the whole community that I was associated with believed were really things that I now saw with my own eyes were wrong. And so that was the beginning of the change for me. The next big step came after about a year when I was recruited to go to work at a startup magazine in Boston called Inc. magazine. It's now a much bigger magazine, but back then it was really very young. And it was only 4 years old. And so it was sort of a startup, really.
Yeah.
And it was a very successful startup. And they were looking for people who had a background in general interest magazine writing. And I had been writing for, Esquire magazine and Harper's magazine and various other publications. And so I had a general interest magazine. I could write the articles for those types of publications, but they also wanted somebody who knew something about business. Well, I'd been at Fidelity for a year, so I knew something about business, not very much, about a tiny bit, but I did know something, and so that was good enough for them. And so they hired me to join the magazine as a senior editor, and then really very shortly thereafterwards, I think it was less than a month, there was a reorganization within the company, and the person who had been the executive editor became the editor-in-chief, and they needed a new executive editor, so they asked me to do it. But the main thing that was happening, this was in the 1980s, and Inc. was started major growth during the 1980s, and it was actually a very exciting period in business history because it was the beginning of what we now know as the entrepreneurial economy. It was, prior to Inc., we can go back to the 1960s and 1970s, people who wrote about entrepreneurs described them as sort of weird people. And it was as if they were all selling things in Times Square with sort of samples on the inside of their jacket. And there were a lot of people who sort of, had this very sort of condescending attitude toward entrepreneurs. Well, that was beginning to change in the early 1980s. And, I like to think that Inc. magazine had something to do with that. Frankly, Ronald Reagan had something to do with that because he was the first president that I'd ever heard of who even used the word entrepreneur. And most Americans may not have known what he was talking about, but he did plant the idea that this is something important that we should pay attention to. Yeah. But it was really the people who were starting companies that were changing the whole image of entrepreneurship. And I'm talking about people like Steve Jobs at Apple and Bill Gates at Microsoft and Yvon Chouinard at Patagonia and Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield at Ben & Jerry's. Yeah. These were all companies that were emerging. And frankly, in every industry, you would find these new companies emerging and disrupting the industries in which they were competing. Yeah. And in the steel industry, for example, it was the mini meals like Nucor. Yeah. In the airlines, it was Southwest Airlines or People Express, which was another startup around that time. It didn't last. But in any event, this for me was a very profound educational experience because I was realizing that I had to really totally reevaluate everything that I had thought I knew about how, not only how business worked, but about how society worked, about where jobs came from, where wealth came from, what wealth was.
I mean, it's analogous. It's analogous to many young people's journey in a sense,
Yes.
but yours was perhaps a bit more intense, let's say. So let me jump into that Inc. magazine time. You were at Inc. magazine during a time when the word entrepreneur changed from being an insult, maybe defined as a shifty character, to being a compliment or aspirational, as we might see it today. Being
Correct.
at the centre of that transformation during that time, I've heard you say that there were a group of companies that helped change that perception that you've just alluded to, who all had something that you've called mojo. Can you share with us what is mojo, and do you believe that a company can create mojo?
Well, I should say that mojo is a term that I came up with much later. It was actually one of the companies in Small Giants who gave me the term. What I realized was that it's basically what I would call the business equivalent or counterpart of charisma. When a leader has charisma, you want to follow that leader. When a business has mojo, you want to be associated with that business. You just think that that business is magic. You want to buy its products. You want to wear its clothes. You want to go to work for it. You know, there are companies if we all think about it, there were certainly a lot of companies in the 1980s, I mentioned a few of them, that sort of had that very special, it's almost like a magical quality. People were attracted to these companies and was experiencing that as an individual while I was watching it going on, because there were companies that I thought were very exciting companies in what they were doing, and there were people who were starting these companies who I was, really just astounded by. Steve Jobs is one of them. I actually had the opportunity to interview Steve Jobs for a 10th anniversary edition, and I'm very grateful, just looking back at this time of my life, that I had the opportunity to do that. And there were a lot of entrepreneurs who I met who, they were creating something new, and they were doing it in new ways.
Yeah.
And they had the types of beliefs about what a company could be that were not at all what I had been raised to think a company was, or that I had come to think that a company was, or that a business was. And that there was a whole way of looking at business that was different from the standard way of looking at it. When I say standard, I mean the way that most business magazines and newspapers were talking about and giving the public, or Hollywood, for example. I mean, I don't know if you can find a single movie or television show from that era in which the business people were portrayed in a positive light. They weren't. It was Hollywood, certainly, of course, is still true today. I mean, Hollywood did not think business people were heroic at all. In fact, they were the bad guys. They were always the bad guys, no matter what movie you had. And I realized that it didn't have to be that way. That was the decision of the people in Hollywood, or people in other parts of the media, that they had decided to portray business that way, but that wasn't really what was going on. And it was with some people. I mean, I don't mean to sugarcoat it. There were some companies that were in fact crooked and deserved to have the book thrown at them. Enron and WorldCom are two examples, but only two. And there were there were companies that were doing very bad things, and it was having repercussions throughout the society. But it was also true that there were some companies that were having the opposite effect, on having very positive effect on their communities. In fact, they often weren't very big companies. They often were smaller companies, but they sort of determined the atmosphere of communities. And as they got bigger, their influence would reach further. And as I say, I want to emphasize that I was learning this. This was not something that this was new to me. And in fact, it wasn't being written about anywhere. We began to write about it in Inc. magazine, but we were practically the only ones who were doing that.
Joe, do you think that mojo is born of the charisma of the leader, or do you think that it can be built in a company?
I think it has to be built in a company. I think the charisma of the leader can help, but really, think about it. Just stay for a minute. Think about what is a company. A company is a group of people who are making a product or making a service that they want to sell to another group of people who like it so much that they're willing to pay the people who are producing it more than what it costs them to create it. That's what we call profit. Profit is actually the applause of customers. It's customers saying, we want this and we're willing to pay you more for it. And that's, when you look at it, when you take it down to its simplest terms, about that is what is going on. That is the essence of a capitalist system, actually. And, as someone who was a diehard socialist, if not a communist, when I was a kid, I began to see that capitalism was in fact something altogether different from the way that Karl Marx described it, or anyone else, or any of his successors. And that, to me, was an exciting discovery.
And as I zoom out, capitalism, along with many other things, is born from the Enlightenment, which the Enlightenment, and I know that this is a bit off topic, the Enlightenment is one of the biggest events that changed the human course of history for the good. But capitalism has a dark path and a light path, let's say. What you're talking about is the light path, I would propose, for want of a better term, in that it can be good. It can create jobs. It can create a meaningful human existence. But this is all born, in my humble opinion, zooming out, it comes from the Enlightenment and all of the good things that happen to change society.
Yeah, well, when you say, I agree with you, what you just said completely, but when you say it has a light side or a brighter side, as well as a dark side, it's because capitalism is something that's practiced by human beings.
Yes.
And human beings also have a bright side and a dark side. And we get plenty of examples of that.
Yeah.
But my point is that there are choices that you make when you're running a business.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to cheat your customers, you could do that.
Yeah.
If you want to take advantage of your employees, you could do that. But that's your choice. It's not business that's making you do that. It's not capitalism that makes you do that. That is the failures of the individuals who are making those choices.
It's a series of choices, isn't it? That's business is all a series of choices that lead you down a path.
Absolutely correct. Totally agree.
Why do you think that leaders confuse greatness with getting very big very fast?
Well, I think I thought about that question. I think that there are really sort of two answers to it. One is just what is the experience of building a business? Well, when you're a small company, the first thing you have to do is to get to a point which I write about in the NAC with Norm Brodsky, is to get to the point where the company can sustain itself on its own internally generated cash flow. In other words, it does not have to rely on outside investors. It does not have to rely on people contributing their savings accounts. It's the customers who are providing the cash, which allows the business to hire people and to grow.
Yeah. So we were on, why do you think leaders confuse greatness with getting very big very fast?
So, well, when you start a business, what is your goal? Your goal is you want people to love whatever it is you're doing. If you create a service or you create a product, you want people out there to love it. And the more people who love it, the better you feel. Not only the better you feel, but the more money you make. So there's that whole internal dynamic. There's another aspect to it, which is external, and that is that there is a lot of reinforcement for people who grow fast and get big. I mean, there are magazines like Fortune or Inc., for that matter. Inc. became famous because it produced what was originally the Inc. 500, which was the 500 fastest growing private companies in the United States. And, so we were encouraging this idea that you were better and you were more successful if you were getting big fast. And so I think it comes from that as well. I know that when I was writing Small Giants, I would sometimes, I remember a conversation that I actually had with a fellow who was the founder and CEO of a Inc. 500 company that is a very fast-growing company. And in a discussion, he happened to ask what I was working on, and I told him about this book that I was doing. And it was like he was totally confused. It was like he said, that goes against everything that I believe. And I say, well, think about it. It is different, but the question is, are you building? Is your goal to build a big business, which is a perfectly valid goal for some people, or is it to build a great business? And if so, do you want a business that is big but not great? That's big but terrible, a terrible place to work? No, nobody wants that. Yeah. Everybody wants a great business. Well, you have to define what you mean by great. And size might enter into it, but again, as you said before, it's choice. Yeah. It's a choice that people make about where they're going with this business that they've created. And
thank you. And so Bernie Goldhirsch was the founder of Inc. magazine. We've spoken about your time at Inc. magazine. He was your boss. And now you've quoted him as saying to the editorial staff the following: think of the business person as an artist using both sides of his brain. You're not just writing for the rational person, you're writing for someone who has the soul of an artist, and his expression is business.
Yeah.
If you reflect on your journey, including the leaders in Small Giants and beyond, and if you agree with Bernie's statement, how do you think that listeners can better embrace their soul of an artist?
Well, first place I would like to say, Bernie, who passed away in the year 2000, was a wonderful man, and he really taught me so much. To this day, I miss him. And one of the things that he taught me, and this again was part of my education, was that business people, if you're going to build a business, you're creating something. You're creating something out of nothing. You believe that you could create something that other people, whether it's a service or a product, other people will want to buy. What's more, you're going to run into problems when you do that, things you don't have enough money for. And in order to find your way around those problems, you've got to be creative. You've got to come up with new ways to do things that other people haven't done. So the point is that when Bernie was talking about the artist using both sides of his brain, or her brain, he was talking about both the left side and the right side.
Yeah.
Which is of course not really accurate but it's the way we talk about it, which is the right side is sort of the creative, intuitive part of your brain, the part that has a vision of where you're going and what you want to do. And then the left side, which is the accountant in you, who is making sure that the numbers add up and that this is organized in a way that makes sense. And when he talked about using both sides of your brain, that's what he was talking about. And it's true that he was extremely idealistic. That's why he started Inc. magazine, really, was that he was somebody who, I could talk a lot about Bernie, but Bernie was a smart Jewish kid from Brooklyn, New York, who was not well off as a child, but was very smart and managed to get into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to his parents' delight. When he graduated, he told them, "Gee, what I really want to do is I want to be a sailor." And now this was not good news to his parents, but he was determined that he really wanted to be a sailor, and so he went to the Caribbean and he worked on yachts there. And at a certain point, he loved sailing so much that he put together a newsletter, and he called it Sail, because at that point all the publications were for motorboats or for sailing vessels. There was nothing strictly devoted to sailing. So he wanted to make this newsletter that was strictly about sailing. Well, it became very, very popular, so popular that he really had to. He was growing it, and he really had to create something better. So it became, instead of a newsletter, it became a magazine, Sail Magazine, which still exists to this day. And at one point, he reached a point where he's there running Sail Magazine, and he's having to make decisions about all sorts of things which he was never trained to do. And it's like he was, here he had created this company, Sail Magazine, and there were all kinds of needs that he had that he couldn't find any place. I mean, if he went to Business Week, or if he went to Fortune Magazine, or if he went to Forbes, they were talking about big businesses. They were talking about U.S. Steel and the United Steel Workers. And that had nothing to do with Bernie trying to run this little magazine. So eventually what he did is that he sold Sail Magazine, and he said, I think that there's a magazine for people like me who are trying to build companies. Yeah. And there was nothing that existed at that point. Yeah. And so he hired a couple of consultants from McGraw-Hill who invested to tell him what they thought about this idea that he had, and they came back and told him it was basically the stupidest idea they'd ever heard of. They said, who wants to write to small business people? Who's going to want to advertise for them? And, like any good entrepreneur, he thanked them and paid them and then ignored everything that they told him. And he went ahead and started Inc. magazine. He was very clever about the way that he did it. He started by giving it away, what's called controlled circulation. In other words, he would find people who were running small to mid-sized businesses, and then he would send them Inc. magazine for free. Well, it turned out that those people who he was sending it to loved the magazine. And so he switched it. He began to get to a point where he said, well, now, if we're going to keep doing this, I've got to charge you. I can get some money from advertising, but but I need to charge you for this. That was the story of Inc.'s startup. And, it got to a point when I was there when it had 6 million readers.
Yeah.
And so he was trying from the beginning, when he hired people to work at that magazine, we were not business people. We were journalists. And we had the ignorance of that I think all journalists have, which they think they know everything in the world, and in fact a lot of times they know absolutely nothing about what they're writing about. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who write about business who have no idea what a profit and loss statement, income statement, and a balance sheet or a cash flow statement are. And he said, here's what you need to focus on. You need to think about the people we're writing this magazine for. And that's where he said, these are people who are artists, who are creating something in the world. And they use both sides of their brain, because if you're going to create something that's going to last, you need both.
You do.
And, this is what inspired me. This is how I got into business, really. And how I came. I mean, it was about seeing business in that way as, fundamentally it's a human enterprise. And, you can run it in a way. There are different ways of running a business. When you look at the humans who are involved in it, there are the suppliers, the people who give you the tools you need. There are the employees, there are the financial people, there are customers, and they're all humans. They're all people.
Yeah.
And you can set up your business in a way where the experience of working together is an uplifting experience. It's something that you enjoy and that you feel is you're doing good.
Yeah.
That you're contributing something to the world. You're contributing something. Obviously, if you're working in the business, you're contributing to your family. But that basically it's possible to set this all up in a way in which everybody is built up and energized and empowered. And that way of there's also obviously a way to run a business where none of that happens, where in fact bad things happen, or maybe it's not all bad, maybe just some bad. It doesn't have to be that way. It gets back to the point I was making earlier, that that's a choice.
Yeah.
If you want to run it that way, that's it, and people should judge you for that choice.
Yeah.
You should judge yourself for that choice. You should look at the choices that you make and say, is this who I am? Is this who I want to be? And you have to be honest with yourself about it. You have to be absolutely straightforward and tell yourself what's really going on here.
This is the end of part 1 of my conversation with Bo. Next week, we continue the discussion on the important elements of long-term success. I hope you can join me then. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.